To speak to you today about something that lies close to my heart, psychedelic therapy research. And I will speak to you from two roles, both from the company, this very small company, Osmond Labs, previously Humankind Labs, focused on catalyzing research with, particularly clinical research with psychedelics, but also as a guest research from Uppsala University, where I do preclinical research, mainly making new psychedelics. And I'm going to talk to you about Psypal, the first EU-funded project with a multi-site clinical trial with psilocybin therapy. And I will start where Stephanie ended, this sense of just how bad the problem is in mental health. The numbers are staggering. It affects everyone in this room, directly or indirectly. We all know someone who is suffering or has been suffering. And to be a bit personal, statistics like this, I'm working with it a lot as a pharmaceutical researcher for many years, but it hit home. It became personal for me in 2018, when someone close to me came down with a depression that was so bad that I feared for their life. And healthcare couldn't do anything. In fact, healthcare made it worse. So from that sense of helplessness, fear, and despair, I really reached out through my networks and through what I knew as a pharmaceutical researcher to see, is there something else? Is there something better? Something that can break through this decades long of desert when it comes to innovation in psychiatry, especially when it comes to medications. So I came upon psychedelics. And I think in 2018, this was the trial everybody talked about. It was a small depression trial at Imperial College with depressed patients. And as you can see, no, you can't see my pointer. The patients are severely to moderately depressed. But the fantastic thing is that after one psilocybin treatment, 1 week later, everybody has improved. Some a lot, some not so much. But the really interesting thing is that 3 months later, and even 6 months later in a subsequent publication, quite a lot of that benefit seemed to stay long after the drug had left the system of the patients. So this shows the potential of psychedelic therapy being a transformative treatment and has the potential of fast and sustained relief of depressive symptoms. So I thought, let's try to get this started in Sweden somehow, because we need something that is better than current care. But we come upon this one. Yeah, it's not evidence-based. It was in 2018 and it's not now. And for those of you who are not fully understanding, and I'm not myself, what is evidence-based? Because this is more of a token that is placed as a block for a lot of things and sometimes enabling a lot of things. It's important to understand what's meant by it. It has to have a solid scientific basis, and when it comes to drugs, it means that it has to be approved by medical agencies. It has to have some sort of cost-benefit analysis showing that, yeah, it's worth it to spend money on these things. And ideally, in a country like Sweden, you would want to be in Socialstyrelsen guidelines so that you can actually point at something that is summarizing all the literature and all the cost-benefit analysis and say that, yeah, this is a good thing. And we are really not there with psychedelic therapy yet. So, 2018, and still, how to fund the clinical trials to get to that evidence. We don't know if it works, but we have to explore it. And as a researcher, this is the first thing I go to. Academic funding, like Vetenskapsrådet, Formas and others, it's great for a single researcher and maybe a small group of researchers, but very rarely it covers clinical trials, and certainly not at the level which is needed to provide evidence. And at the other end of the scale, you have a venture capital, and that's a huge resource when it comes to fund clinical trials, but it's usually not done until you are fairly close to an application, because those who give you the venture capital, the investors, they will want to have their money back with interest. So you have to make sure that you can make certain promises. You can say a lot about venture capital, but without it, we would barely have any new drugs. And then, in the huge gap between these two, you sometimes have philanthropy. And I will speak about that in the next slide. But first, I need to mention EU research funding as something that I personally think is a perfect match for psychedelic therapy, because you can't rely on the academic funding to be enough, and venture capital comes with a lot of direction to earn money. But this EU research funding, it's complex, yeah, but it's about changing society and taking a multi-stakeholder perspective. In 2018, I had some experience of 1 to 2, but not the other 2, 3 and 4. But we got into contact with a wealthy individual that enabled this trial to happen in Sweden. In fact, it was the reason to found Osmond Labs as a vehicle to make this happen, to take the money together with a researcher at Karolinska, Johan, Mikael, and Maria, and make this come true. Take it through the advisory committees of Läkemedelsverket and all the practical things. It was a lot of work for me to be a support, giving them psilocybin and many other things. But now it's completed. And according to Johan, this is about to be published any time now, so exciting times. But this is just the first stepping stone. There is so much more needed to talk about evidence. We need larger trials and how to get there. Yeah, when I met Frederic Loiret, also a researcher with a lot of experience in raising funding through EU sources and project manage these hugely complex projects, I saw that this was a perfect match for what we need to do. So he's also very knowledgeable about psychedelics, even though he's not formally a researcher in psychedelic. So we sat together and wrote applications, and we managed to get this Psypal funding of 6.5 million euros in 2023, and this is now running for 4 years. And this is very recent. Integrate below. The press release is not out yet, but I can't resist sharing it. We got, and Frederic was unfortunately not so involved in this, but I and Joost from Open wrote an application for the Marie Curie doctoral network and got it the first time we applied. So that's pretty fantastic, I think. 16 PhD students in psychedelic therapy across Europe, 2 here in Uppsala. Yeah, it's a lot, right? Thank you. Yeah, it's for all of us, really, and I am quite proud of that. But I will talk mostly about Psypal today. And it's psilocybin therapy for psychological distress or depression, if you will, in palliative patients. And now, before you think about palliative care as end-of-life care, I have to straighten that out, that according to WHO, palliative care is not about end-of-life. It's about diseases that can't be cured, that shorten your life, reduce your life quality. And palliative care is about helping these patients to a better life. So it can go on for years, even decades. So in that context, we are looking to treat those who come into a situation where they, whoa, my life is not going to be as I thought. I am suffering from this life-shortening disease and come into depression because of that. So we hope to be able to treat those patients with psilocybin therapy. And as I said, it's running for 4 years. It's 100 patients. And we are working with patients that are not cancer patients. There is a lot of data on cancer in psilocybin therapy, but we want to expand the scope here. So it's people that are clearly dying from ALS or from really fast progressing MS, atypical Parkinson, or late stage COPD, the lung disease, chronic lung disease. So when these diseases give depression, that's where we want to step in. And the trial itself, it's hugely complex with many things we measure, mixed methods. What I mean with that is we have a lot of psychological questionnaires, but we also have qualitative interviews. We have neurobiological measures like EEG, but also blood sample analysis, trying to understand the mechanism of what's happening. And as EU wanted this to be, we also target the spiritual aspects of its treatment, which is maybe not so weird thinking about it's talking about life and death. I also want to say some of this. This is not just the clinical trial. Public and patient involvement, it's a way to engage with patients on a level that researchers typically don't do. This is public involvement that's happening right now, informing you about Psypal. Policy, informing politicians. EU Coalition for Standardization, that's very EU. But it's important, right, that there is an entity that lives on after Psypal to inform clinicians that, yeah, this is what we know about psychedelic therapy, and attempt to set a standard for that. We explore business models, because psychedelics don't fit with psychotherapy straight up. It doesn't fit with psychiatry, it's not the same. It's something new, and we need to create the infrastructure for that. We explore care pathways, which is widely different across Europe. Health economy, I'll talk more about that. A very important piece of the puzzle, how to inform decision makers when a treatment is worth it. So we gather experts from many, many fields, and this is a beautiful and complex group. And I must say that it was quite fun to write the clinical trial protocol with these 35 researchers or so. One of the most difficult things I ever done. But it's approved and it's rolling now. The first patients will be treated any day in Groningen, Holland, most likely. And we have 19 partners in 7 countries. The yellow ones are the Swedish ones, because I want to highlight just how many Swedish we are in this consortium. Unfortunately, at the time of writing, there was no site in Sweden that could take on, had the capacity to take on this trial. So we have 4 sites in the Netherlands, in Denmark, and in Czechia and in Portugal. But we have companies, we have foundations, we have universities, and patient and clinicians organizations. Let me talk a bit about the clinical trial design of Psypal. This is a quite ambitious protocol that we are, after screening, giving the patients free prep sessions with 2 therapists, building a foundation of trust, hopefully, and talking about expectations of treatment and what it will mean. And then we have the first dose session, which is, as you may notice, 15 milligrams. It's not a full dose. It's not a full psychedelic experience, but it's quite a long way towards it. And the intention with this is try to get the patients to acclimatize, if you will, to a very different state of consciousness. And this is coming out of qualitative interviews of other clinical trials with just 1 dose. You can imagine just how much pressure there is on the patient for everything to happen in that single day. So if you had never experienced psychedelics before, it can be quite helpful, we believe, to have this first dose, 2 integration sessions, and then a full dose and 3 integration sessions. Then 6 weeks later, we have a primary endpoint to check how did it go with the depression, did we help them or not. And as you see, there are 2 paths, 2 arms here. You have a high dose and you have a low dose, so you get randomized. 2/3 get randomized to the high dose arm and 1/3 to the low dose arm, which is basically a microdose, subperceptual. But at the primary endpoint, we unblind these. So those who receive the low dose will have the opportunity to receive a full dose, open label, so they know they will get the full psilocybin dose. We think this is important. And then for 6 months, we follow the patients. We offer them peer support networks, and we offer them a digital care platform with exercises developed here in Sweden. And not all patients will live throughout the trial. That is the stark reality. But we hope to follow many, at least, for the full trial length. So this is how it could look like. It's not from our trial, because we haven't had this yet. It's any day now. But it illustrates how psychedelic therapy could look like in practice. It's a home-like environment, although it is in a hospital. The patient lies in a bed with two therapists by their side with eye shades to direct the patient's attention inwards. There are headphones with carefully selected music to guide and support the patient through something that can be, it can be a lot of euphoria, it can be a sense of unity, but it can also be anxiety and really deep fears. Ego dissolution, meaning you don't exist anymore, and sometimes access to early memories. Now, these two therapists, it's the most expensive part of this whole treatment, right? The pill doesn't cost that much. So we need to be very careful of saying what we know about how important they are. And especially from last century, there was some research indicating that this is really important for safety. You have to help the patient come through the anxiety and the fear, and maybe hopefully transform that into something useful through integration therapy, so you can actually make meaning of what you went through. Now, we haven't shown that in rigorous research, in modern research. So I want to be clear on that. We need more research about what the therapist should do, and just because of why they are important. Because there is so much we don't know. How does this work? And I was asked to summarize mechanisms of psychedelic therapy, and this is a bit of a challenge, so please bear with me this imperfect attempt, because there's so much we don't know. But I'd like to highlight 4 theories, hypotheses that I think are worth mentioning. First, you have memory consolidation, maybe most important in PTSD with MDMA therapy, where under the influence of MDMA, you can approach memories that are so difficult, traumatic, that you otherwise can't. And activate them, make them unstable, these memories, and hopefully restore them in a way so that they are less disturbing for the patient with effect on PTSD. But it can also happen with psilocybin and other drugs. For those who like brain imaging, disruption of neural networks is really important, because you can actually in real time see how you disrupt with psychedelics certain networks, such as the default mode network, the sense of self, if you will, and relax rigid beliefs about who I am, how the world works, and how to behave. And these beliefs can then be relaxed under psychedelics. You can see that, how these networks relax and allow new perspectives, which may be more constructive and lead to less depression, for instance. This one is maybe a bit provocative, but I think it's important to mention. It's Predrag Petrovic at Karolinska who raised this point that, yeah, placebo works, and psychedelics create significance. If you ask patients in psychedelic therapy clinical trials, they typically report that, yeah, this was one of the most important experiences in my life. So take placebo, take significance, and you got the super placebo. And I mean, if it works, it's all good. Regulators don't care about mechanism. They care about safety and efficacy. And if it works, it's good. Mechanism can be quite helpful, though, in order to understand how to use the treatment. So it's still very important research. The 4th mechanism that I would like to mention is neuroplasticity. And let me try to explain this through critical periods of learning. When we humans develop in our life, we go through these periods where we're supposed to learn to walk, to talk, to behave towards others. And these periods are open for a time, and then they close, and then it's much more difficult to learn. So if you're 10 years old and you start to learn to speak, it's really hard. And when it comes to more complex critical learning periods, such as how you behave to others, how you attach to others, for instance, yeah, it can be tricky. And Guldölen has shown, this graph is from one of her papers, that regardless of a molecular mechanism, whereas ketamine, psilocybin, MDMA, or even ibogaine, you have this opening of critical learning periods. So, I don't know which one is right. Maybe a little bit of everything. And I think it's a very important research trying to understand, because this is so wildly different than any other treatment in psychiatry. Psychedelic therapy needs to be understood in order for us to apply it in the right way, if it becomes evidence-based. But back to Psypal. I want to illustrate in another way how this project covers much more than the clinical trial. Work package 1, it's divided in 7 work packages. Work package 1, the project management, is where I spend most of my time. The clinical trial, work package 2, and 3 is the mechanism that I spoke about just now. The hugely important work package 4 with therapy manual, training, and also the public and patient involvement and continued care. Work package 5, dissemination communication. This is one work package 5 activity that's happening right now. And work package 6, this is implementation in society. And I have the honor to lead that work package. So it's about, it's called exploitation in EU speech. And it's not a pretty word, but think about this as you have to make scientific findings transformed into something that really makes a difference in society. It shouldn't end with just a publication. If you need to start a company, do so. If you need to make the healthcare change by whatever means is needed, yeah, then let's do so. So it's about making change in society. Work package 7 is ethics, and that's too much to go through right now. It's a lot. This one is not, I won't go through it in detail, but what I want to illustrate with this picture is just how many different perspectives EU are expecting you to take in order to influence change in society. So you have to step outside the researcher discipline that you may be familiar with, or the patient perspective that is your home, or whatever. You have to give answers to all the pain points of these different stakeholders in order to actually affect change. Because it's a long chain of many events with many different stakeholders that needs to happen for this to be implemented. And the weakest link in that chain has to be addressed as well. So this is a way to illustrate just how broad perspective you have to have in an EU project. And I'm grateful that there is funding for this, because it's needed. I promised to talk about health economy as one important piece of the puzzle to inform decision makers about whether this is a good idea or not. And this is my last slide. I will start with talking about the concept quality adjusted life years. And one QALY is 1 year of life in full health. May sound a bit abstract, but it's hugely useful when you want to compare apples to oranges. When you want to compare how much burden is it to live with depression, with how much burden is it to live with cancer or something else. We need to have a way to compare these things, because decision makers typically sit with tax money and it's limited and you can't ask for more. So you have to make the best for your patients, for the society with this money that is available. So you need to somehow compare these very, very different diseases and see what we can do, what kind of treatments will have certain effects. So health economy is about calculating quality and cost and benefit. And let me walk you through this example. And I'm a bit hampered by not being able to point, but I think it's okay. So if one looks at depression, there is a cost for society, right? Depressed people don't work as much, they don't bring in tax money as much, or they don't promote the economy as much. And there is healthcare costs. So on average, about 190,000 Swedish crowns per year and depressed patient. And if we look at the reviews that are now plentiful about psychedelic therapy, This Gukusan et al. A few years back looked at health economy perspective in a very helpful way. Because according to their analysis, there is a fairly stable response and response rate by treating depressed patients with psychedelic therapy for a year with these numbers. And they also arrived at a cost-lowering effect. And 0.27 QALYs is gained during that year with psychedelic therapy. I mean, it's just a number, but it's pretty fantastic, I would say. So, if you then transform these numbers into the decision makers now represented by TLV, who typically make the decisions in Sweden about how much treatments can cost, they set a value for a QALY. So a QALY can be cost effective if it's 500,000 Swedish crowns. So it's just a number, but it's really important for politicians to be able to decide things on what is worth it or not. And according to these calculations, if we can deliver psilocybin therapy below 101,000 Swedish crowns, it seems to be cost effective, provided that later clinical trials confirm that these benefits from the treatment is there. So I hope you have managed to follow this somewhat boring overview of the health economy, because it's very detailed and very much numbers and not personal at all, but it's hugely important piece of a puzzle of implementation in society. And it wouldn't be possible without Inna, professor here at Uppsala University, health economy researcher, and also part of the Psypal consortium. And thank you for listening.